What's poppin', y'all? Welcome back to another episode of NBA Weekly. I am your host, Pee Wee the Plug, one fourth through the wire, number one Knicks fan in the world. And today, I'm gonna be answering all of y'all draft questions leading up to the 2021 NBA draft that we have coming up on Thursday. We are officially in draft week. First and foremost, before we even dive right into it, I want to give a special thanks to all of y'all for dropping y'all questions on my tweet. I tweeted out last night, to reply and drop below all of y'all questions for the draft. And we got like 140 replies. So with that being said, this will be a two-part video. We'll do the first part today, and then tomorrow we'll drop part two. And also, after the draft, we're going to be doing something similar when I'm going to ask y'all to drop y'all questions for post-draft concerns, questions, or, results. So without further ado, let's dive right in. And shout out to my guy, Robert. Robert with the first question. He asks, how do you personally determine a player's ceiling and floor? I think that's a great question, Robert. For me, I just use my basketball mind and my basketball intelligence. So I look at the league of today and what's going on, what works, what's successful, the molds of players that succeed and are highly sought after. And then I look at the amateur level of basketball and who's trying to come into the league. And I see what they're doing over there, and I try to see what players are showing skill sets that are transferable to the NBA, because you have to be able to transfer your skill set. So, for instance, a player with a high ceiling, like Cade Cunningham, would be a guy who has God-gifted athletic abilities plus a skill set. So you look at Cade Cunningham with a 6'8" frame, but then you also look at the skill set of gifted passer and playmaker. He came into college with outside shooting consistency questions. Is he a go-to guy? Can he score in isolation? He did all of that. He shot 40% from the three in college on a team with limited talent. He carried them to wins as a number one option, one of the best scorers in crunch time in the nation in college basketball. And we still was able to see him be a point forward type of guy who could take over games. So that's a guy who has a tremendous ceiling, because he has the 6'8" frame, athletic ability, but then he has a legitimate skill set that he displayed for an entire year. That ceiling is out of here. But then there's also another type of player that has a high ceiling, which is a player that you would say like a rookie Greek freak, right? Where there isn't that much of a skill set yet, but there's just an athletic freak nature about a player because of his size, his speed, his strength, his leaping ability. And you look at that and you say, man, if we can take all of those God-given athletic abilities and we can add some skill to it, he would be out of this world, which makes that type of player have a high ceiling. Then, as far as floor, you have certain guys like this year's draft. You have a guy like Moses Moody, a guy who shoots the ball really good, off the catch, plays without the ball, and then he defends. And he has a 7-foot plus wingspan, which is going to help him defend, and he's going to be a versatile defender. That's a guy who has a high floor but a low ceiling. He didn't do anything in college that said, man, this dude, if he does that, he didn't show any crazy flashes. What we saw is kind of what we're going to get from him. And because he's so young, there's some little window of potential. But for the most part, he basically showed us what we're going to get from him. And that is okay. You know what I mean? Like, having a high floor, low ceiling isn't a bad thing. I think a lot of people actually would prefer to draft guys that way because it's a lot safer. You'll hear that a lot, like, oh, this guy's a safer pick. You're going to get this from him and you're going to get that from him and blah, blah, blah. The only time people don't want high floor guys is like in the top 5 pick. Like, during the top 5 picks, they're looking for guys that have extreme upside, superstar potential, and high ceilings because they want, a guy that they can build their entire franchise around. But when you start to get, out of the top 5, out of the top 10, and start to go out of the lottery, the more and more those guys that are drafted, you kind of want the safer picks, because those teams are usually putting players around a particular player, like the Mavericks. The Mavericks, if they were in this draft, if they had a pick, they would probably look for a guy with a high floor because they want to know exactly what they're getting from a guy and what role they're going to give him to put next to Luka, because their goal is to complement Luka with as many players as they can. Same thing with the Hawks. The Hawks are drafting with the 20th pick. They're going to look for players who can complement Trae Young. And the players in this draft that are probably going to complement Trae Young are going to be guys with high floors and not so, and low ceilings. And then you have teams like OKC who are just trying to accumulate talent, and they're probably going to try to push for guys who have high ceilings and maybe low floors. And that's exactly how you kind of gauge it, or how I gauge it through my basketball perspective and lens. But overall, good question, Robert. I really like that one to start us off. The second question comes from Sono. Sono says, who are some of the lower end prospects that you can see growing into potential all-stars or superstars? Because we hear a lot about the Cades and Mobleys of the world, but not people around the ranks of a BJ Boston or Davion Nix. Not saying those names in particular could / will, but so he's saying what players around the prospect board closer to BJ Boston and Davion Nix, which are lower, versus the obvious guys who have superstar, all-star potential. For me, a name that I would look into, or a few names that I would look into at the lower part of the draft boards, would be like JT Thor. JT Thor is a young guy, one and done prospect out of Auburn, 6'10", and he has that unicorn-esque skill set. So he has the size at 6'10". He's shot blocking is amazing, rim protection. Then he also shown he can step out and shoot threes, pick and pops, catch and shooting, and those are the makeups of unicorns, guys who can shoot threes, protect the rim, and he's shown that he can put the ball on the floor to get to the rim to finish, to draw for out, whatever. So at his age, with that skill set, with some years of NBA development, he could be a star. I'm not saying he will be, but his stars align that there's a chance for him to have some stardom within his game. Same thing with Greg Brown out of Texas. Greg Brown is 6'8", 6'9", forward, who is athletic as hell, also showing that he can block some shots and have some rim protection for you, very long and athletic. And he shot the three ball, shown some flashes of three ball capability, and even putting the ball on the floor. So the same thing. He's a little what's the word? Raw. A lot of his skills are a bit raw, but if you can fine tune them and really get them sharp with his 6'9" frame and his athletic ability, there's potential for him to have some star ability. And then I look at guys like Cam Thomas and Josh Christopher. They're one and done players as well, but what they do is they get buckets, and getting buckets is a necessity. There's always going to be a spot on an NBA roster for players who can go get you a bucket. Guys that can create nothing out of something, late shot clock, late game, whether it's a starting role, whether it's coming off the bench to a lesser degree. The guys who can go get you a bucket out of thin air are always going to be looked at and needed on NBA rosters. So those are a few of the guys that I would say. Shout out to Sono for a good question. We have Dre Bray A. I hope I'm saying your name right, Dre Bray A. He says, I know you ain't that much of a fan of Davion Mitchell at 7, the Golden State Warriors, since he'd probably only be able to play exclusively behind Curry. But if they were to trade the pick, would you have a problem with another team where he fits better picking him at 7? No, you just answered your question. My bone to pick with Davion going at 7 is the fact that the Warriors picked there. And you're going to draft him with the intent of him being a backup. I don't think that you should use a top 10 pick purposefully on a player that's going to be a backup. So if a team trades with the Warriors and they have a role for him that isn't going to be him playing backup, at least not intentionally, then yeah, I'm all for it. So that one was easy. But yeah, that's pretty much my whole thing with the Warriors pick of Davion Mitchell and everything. Shout out to my guy Sim Gaming Network, Schneid. He sent over a question. He said, what's the one draft day trade you want to see happen that nobody's talking about? So what I will say is that because it's the off season and because it's around draft time, Everybody's talking about all potential trades. Like, let's put that out there. There's no trade that's not being talked about that could potentially happen. Like, everybody's talking right now. It's the beginning of the offseason, so it's all chatter. But the one draft day trade I would like to see, I would potentially like to see the Cavs move from 3 to the Magic and get 5 and 8. I feel like both sides would evenly win. I think the Magic are in need of a legitimate building block. As of right now, their roster and young core are made up of a lot of players that will complement a legitimate face of the franchise or building block, and they just don't have that building block yet. So with a trade with the Cavs would allow them to push up into the top 3 and potentially draft their building block. And then the Cavs, on the other hand, I think the one of the best fitting prospects for them would still be available at 5, which is Scotty Barnes. I love Scotty Barnes potentially playing with the Cleveland Cavaliers, especially when you think about that smaller size backcourt that they have of Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. They're about to give Jared Allen that money. You bring in Scotty Barnes. Defensively, he's going to guard well and help you out with the holes that you're going to have from having a smaller backcourt. And then offensively, he's just going to allow you to have a more lethal offense and not so predictable. You know what I mean? That's the word. The Cavaliers have a predictable offense right now, where it's basically going to be Darius Garland, and he's going to be putting a lot of PNRs, pick and rolls, and trying to make a defense collapse, kicking it out. Colin Sexton is occasionally going to get some isolations and whatnot, and those guys are just going to try to create. With Scotty Barnes, he's a guy that can grab a rebound, go, he can push the break, create for others. You can have him be a big point guard, point forward at times. Let Darius Garland play off the ball because he can shoot and off the catch and off the dribble. Use that more to your advantage. Same thing with Colin Sexton. And it just gives you a more dynamic offense than just pick and roll with these small guards and trying to have them create for everybody else. So you can have somebody that can create for them while they can also still create for others, and it just gives you a more dynamic offense. So I like Scotty Barnes there at 5 for them. And then also they would have the 8th pick. So you would trade your 3rd pick, only move 2 spots down, and inherit an entire other top 10 pick at 8, which could get you Book Night, which now makes it even more comfortable for you to move on from Sexton or keep Sexton, and you add that 8th pick, whoever you want it to be, if it's not Book Night, to a young core of Isaac Okoro, Scotty Barnes, Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, Jared Allen, and then whoever you pick there, and then chances are you're probably going to be, a better youth movement, but you're probably going to be garbage again next season, and then you'll inherit another top pick next year, and you'll continue to play the lottery game, and you'll be putting together a nice, young, exciting core, something like what the Thunder have. So I want to see the Cavs do that. That's a good question, Sim. Real cool, real good question. Jakey B says, who is your favorite of the guards who are going to fall out of the lottery? There are so many talented guards who will fall into space, and they all can help different teams in different ways. Every mock draft seems to have very different orders for all of them. It's a good question, and that's true. I agree. Every mock draft has different orders for guards going outside of the lottery. We know the lottery guards are going to be Cade Cunningham, and I'm guessing you're talking point guards. Cade Cunningham, Jalen Suggs, potentially Davion Mitchell will go in the lottery. And then we start to talk about outside of the lottery, which is like Sharif Cooper, Trey Mann, Bones Highland. For me, I really like Trey Mann. I really, really like Trey Mann just because he's a shot creator. He has range. And I think he's versatile in how you can play him. He can go to a team and come off the bench. He can go to a young team and start. The pick and roll game will be good. And I think with development, he could be extremely special. But I think with the way that the game is played today and how a lot of teams try to run their offenses, having a threat like Trey Mann from the 3-point area is crucial. And the fact that he can just get his own shot as a guard is nice. And I like his size. He's around 6'4", 6'5", as they say. So with that size and his shooting ability, pick and roll, he's going to be nice. He's going to be real nice. So I would say Trey Mann for me, Jakey B. Trey Mann for me. Simon says, do you believe that the age of players like Davion Mitchell really affects their draft stock? Of course. That's why over the last, I don't know how many years, the number 1 pick has really been a one-and-done player. You know what I mean? Like, it's because of the age. It's because of the age. That's just the way it is right now. I can't remember the last time where the first overall pick wasn't a 19-year-old kid or anything like that. And it makes sense. It makes sense. Teams these days are more so drafting for upside and for what guys will be able to do down the line with their potential. And I'm not mad at it. It's just the way it is. But we are starting to see the turning of a chapter where older guys like Davion Mitchell, we're now seeing are in a conversation to go in the lottery or potentially go in the top 10. And I think that's a new thing because for so long, older players were just pushed to the end of the first round or like late in the draft. But now we're starting to see Davion Mitchell, Corey Kispert, Chris Duarte, Jared Butler. These are all names who are around, this lottery mid-first round talks to help teams, because we've seen over the last few years that older players can come in and help you, and they're going to do it quite quickly, and quite fast. So I'm liking to see that. But yeah, the age definitely plays a part. There's no secret to that. N. Taylor says, why would the N. Taylor 03, let me not forget your 03. Why would the Cavaliers take Evan Mobley when they have Jared Allen pending free agency? The reason they would do that is because Jared Allen, as good as he is, he's not a good enough player to make you not draft at his position. I think in order for a player to not be drafted at your position, you need to be like top 10, top 5 in your position. And I'm not sure if Jared Allen is that. He's not an all-star. I wouldn't be surprised if he's never an all-star. No disrespect to Jared Allen, but you have to be a supreme level talent to stop a team like the Cavaliers, who are just trying to accumulate as much talent as they can right now, to not pick at your position. So that's the first part. Evan Mobley could actually play with Jared Allen as well. That's the other part. And then two, they can take Evan Mobley, and if they can play together, and if Evan Mobley is this guy with a superstar potential like us draft people think, you just make Jared Allen expandable. And you get something for him instead of just letting him go. But when you're the Cavaliers, when you're the Thunder, when you're the Magic, when you're the Pistons, you just want to accumulate as much talent as you can. You're not really concerned with who plays where. You just want talent on talent on talent. And you'll figure out the rest as the years progress. But you just want to accumulate talent. So that's why N. Taylor 03. That's why. Gregory asks, which player on your rankings is further away from consensus media mocks / big boards? Why are you high/low on that player compared to the rest of draft evaluators? My instant answer has to be Davion Mitchell. And the reason being is because, again, no knock on Davion. I'm happy for him. He's going to be a very good pro, and he's going to have a very good career. But there's a lot of hype beasts mocks that are trying to force him at 7 to the Warriors. And I'm going to say it again. I just don't believe in using a top 10 pick, a 7th overall pick, to intentionally put somebody off the bench. Now, again, if there's a Kobe White situation like the Bulls where they drafted him at 7, but their intent was for him to be groomed and developed into a starting point guard. Now, if that's your intention but it doesn't work, then you live with that. But the Warriors would intentionally be drafting Davion Mitchell and making him a for sure backup. We all know there's no way in hell he's going to ever start over Curry. So what are we doing? You can go get a backup point guard later at 14 at the end of the lottery, or get one in free agency. You know what I mean? But don't use a 7th overall pick for Davion Mitchell. And then also Davion Mitchell, he is a bit older, which hurts some timelines. And that it's not to use the age thing against him, but timelines are important. You know what I mean? You don't want to put a aging player with a bunch of young guys who aren't on a roster, who isn't trying to really compete or do anything for the next 3 or 4 years. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make sense with that. I think those type of teams should look for upside. And then when you look at the cards that are dealt, it's hard to tell me that Davion Mitchell is a top 10 player right now. I mean, top 10 player in this draft with the teams that we see. You know what I mean? Like I mentioned, the Warriors don't seem like a good fit. The Kings at 9, they have De'Aaron Fox. Even the Magic at 8. Do you want to put them in a situation where there's Markelle, Cole Anthony, RJ Hampton, now Davion Mitchell? I don't think so. You look at the Pelicans. Yeah, Lonzo looks like he may be leaving, but you just drafted Kyra Lewis last year in the lottery. So you're using 2 lottery picks in back-to-back years on point guards? That wouldn't be a good look for the Pelicans. So for me, as early as I can see Davion, which would make sense, is like the Pacers, the back end of the lottery. A lot of people want to make Davion Mitchell like this top 10 player, and I just don't see it. I think 13 is the starting point for me with the Pacers. He can play with a Malcolm Brogdon, back up a Malcolm Brogdon. You know what I mean? He'll play for a head coach, a veteran head coach like Rick Carlisle. We saw what he was able to do with Jalen Brunson coming off the Mavericks bench and carve out him a role. And that's a talented team. But I don't want Davion Mitchell as one of my on a young team that's supposed to spearhead this rebuild. I think Davion Mitchell is a guy you want to put on a nice team that already has some established talent, like the Pacers. You would put him in a situation where he's playing with Sabonis, Brogdon, T.J. Warren, Karis LeVert, Miles Turner. That's a nice collection of NBA players, and you put him on there, and he helps out in his ways. But I wouldn't want him to be one of my featured guys. I don't think Davion Mitchell is one of those guys where you need him to be one of your best players. That's why I think if the Cards were played a little different, and the Bulls had their 8th overall pick and it didn't belong to the Magic, he would be great. Because you have Zach LaVine as your guy. You have Nikola Vucevic. Then you would have Davion Mitchell come in and be a serviceable point guard. You would have Kobe White be your 6th man off the bench microwave. Patrick Williams, Thaddeus Young. You have a nice mesh of young, older veteran players that all make sense. It will go well. But the way the Cards are dealt, I don't see Davion Mitchell as a top 10 player because of the teams and because of what top 10 teams need right now. It's not it for me. It's not it for me. And it doesn't mean he won't be a good player or have a good career. I think there are places for him where he could thrive. And like I said, the Bulls would have been super ideal. But of course, they don't have their pick. And the last question of part 1 of me answering y'all questions, it comes from Jordy Nelson, 777. Shout out to Jordy Nelson. Out of the top 5 to 7 prospects, who has the highest ceiling or who has the lowest floor? Highest ceiling is obviously Cade Cunningham, 6'8", with the skill set we've seen to be able to be a number 1 option, carry a team offensively, playmaking abilities, 40% from 3. Defense is solid. He really has no holes in his game at 19. So you put that with a 6'8" frame and the fact that he has to continue to go into his peak, he has the highest ceiling. As far as lowest floor, probably Kuminga. When you look at Kuminga and the cloth he's cut from, the whole big defensive wings who just need their offense to catch up to their defense, you start to think about some guys what it worked for. It worked for Kawhi. That was the guy that everybody was like, hey, you take that wing and he could be the next Kawhi. He can be, another version of Kawhi. And then the new one is Jaylen Brown. Now every year we're going to hear these big wings come in and their offense is going to need to catch up to their defense. And it's going to be like, hey, he could be the next Jaylen Brown. You can get you could have you a nice two-way superstar or a star. But then on the flip side of that type of mold of player, you also have guys like Stanley Johnson, who offense never caught out with the defense, and it was really a liability and a guy that was hard to put on the floor for teams. You also look at names like Josh Jackson, who the Suns took at 4. Offense never caught out to the defense. He's still to this day kind of hard for teams to find a way to put on the floor. So I would have to say Jonathan Kuminga with the lowest ceiling, and then the highest. With the lowest floor, but the highest ceiling is definitely Cade Cunningham. Appreciate all of y'all for part 1. Like I said, part 2 will be tomorrow. I'll be answering the rest of y'all questions for the draft. As always, this is NBA Weekly. I am P with a plug, and I am out.